Hello everyone, welcome to the Video Game Development in the West panel. Today I'll be just a moderator and therefore I will try not to speak too much. To maximize the time, our brilliant team of panelists will have to share their ideas, concerns, insights and takeaways. The structure of the panel today will be the following. After the introductions, I will start asking questions to our panelists, and then after about 20 minutes in, I will start taking your questions because this is your panel. Because of logistic reasons, we have been told that the questions that we could take would only be the ones written in English. And therefore, I have a computer nearby, and I will be picking the questions that you will have been writing in English. The ones that will have been writing in Japanese will be left for the end of the panel. And so while you are starting writing your questions, let's get things started. There's a significant difference between how games are developed in Japan and in the West, in terms of processes, team structures, decision-making, project life cycles, and much more. In order to tackle a wide variety of topics and have cross-discipline discussions, we have gathered for you speakers that have a very varied background: writing, art, production, and technology. So without further ado, let's start the introduction. Olivier, would you introduce yourself to the audience?
Certainly, Julien. So my name is Olivier Pomarez, and I'm supervising Ubisoft Laforge offices in Montreal and in Toronto, where we are doing applied R&D.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Konstantine?
Thank you, Julien. My name is Konstantine Paradias, and I am a writer for Shapefarm AB.
Cécile?
Hi, I'm Cécile Minaud. I'm it's hard to say, cross-project setup artist at Dontnod Entertainment.
Jeff?
Yes, hello everyone. My name's Jeff Skalski. I'm the COO and executive producer at a new independent studio based out of Quebec City, Canada, called Yellow Brick Games. And I'm very excited and happy to be here. Looking forward to the questions.
Thank you, Jeff. To spice things up a little bit, we have a special guest, Guillaume, that has experience in both Western and Japanese way of making games. And you might have seen his amazing CEDEC talk last year on that very topic. If not, just go Google it on YouTube, as Guillaume made it recently available for all. Guillaume, could you introduce yourself?
Thanks for the plug, Julien. Nice to meet you. My name is Guillaume. I'm the founder and CEO of Wizcorp. We are a work-for-hire game studio based in Tokyo. We've been doing game development for 14 years. We started in 2008. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. So let's get started without further ado on the questions. So I'm going to ask all our speakers here one by one. Olivier, is there like a cool technique or process or game you discovered recently that got you impressed or excited?
So, yeah, in my position, doing research and development, something that I discovered recently is the application of natural language processing in how we are developing some part of the assets into games, from being able to sensitize dialogues, for instance, and to actually move forward on that direction. That's one tech, and also some connected one, which is the text-to-speech abilities are becoming quite serious for game development application.
We'll definitely come back to NLP during the course of this session, so stay tuned. Konstantine, do you have anything that got you impressed or excited on that front?
For me, it's actually two things. One is the tool called Yarn Spinner, which has recently been worked on by Infinite Playground. It is essentially programming and coding tool that lets writers and narrative designers pretty much use basic programming and code to input text, documents, and NPCs in the game. So that helps solve a lot of the bottlenecking that sometimes is caused when writing is input. And the second thing, this one is a game, it's an indie game that I recently found out. It's called All Hail Temos. And the idea is that it's an open world RPG where there is no main quest. It is just the player going around in sub-quests. And like in Majora's Mask, as you do the sub-quests, the side quests, I'm sorry, the world moves along with it. And eventually that affects, how procedurally it moves on.
Wow, that sounds very interesting. I didn't run into this game, but I definitely will do so. Cécile, cool technique, process, game you discovered recently?
Well, yeah, I have few things too. It's hard to choose between. Recently, I started to play to Death Stranding, and I was just amazed about the technical stuff for setup and rigging. For example, simple things like ropes. It's amazing. Like the techniques is quite good. I don't understand right now how it's working, but wow. It's impressive, I would say.
I think we have a common friend that might have the answer to your question. Because
really?
Tepe used to work at a Kojima production
yeah,
a long time ago.
Yeah, exactly. But same thing. It was a new sort of working, so he didn't knew exactly, but he was as amazed as me. Like, wow, it's impressive.
He probably has the right connections to ask.
Yeah, maybe.
To know who to ask. Jeff, do you have anything that got you excited recently or impressed?
Yeah, so I play a lot of games. My work is my passion. My passion is my work. So what I've been kind of excited seeing happen, because, tools have grown, the powers of these engines, what we can do in Unreal, what we can do in Unity, it just continues to impress me year over year. And a lot of companies have decided to take these tools and just make bigger games. And personally, I'm not too excited about just bigger games. I just don't have the time anymore. But I like people using the tools to do something different, having a different approach. So 2 games that kind of come to mind in terms of more of their visual art style. I'm very attracted by graphics. Rollerdrome by Roll7. It's just a very unique approach. It's got this kind of 70s vibe to it and palette. And then RPG Time, The Legend of Wright, I think it's what it's called, which I believe it was done by an indie developer here in Japan. Now that it just released on the Switch, I was really attracted by this kind of RPG in a notebook. It kind of hit a note with me as a child. I remember doing that as well, so now I can interact with his game and his journal. So these are 2 games that come to mind.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Guillaume?
I'm going to be a bit more mainstream, but I was really impressed by Unreal 5 Nanite, and especially the game. I think it's only a demo currently, but Black Myth Wukong, and especially the scenes with the snow, and how you walk in the snow with your character, and you can see all the traces of your movements in the snow, which looks first very, very realistic, very impressive, and would have been really hard to do before, just because of the number of polygons it would have been to, and the amount of data you would need to keep for that. So that's one thing that really impressed me.
From your perspective, was the effect a lot better than, was it Assassin's Creed 3 or 4 that was in North America, where you had this kind of snowy... 3.
Yeah.
And you had traces in the snow, as far as I remember. Also, I was very impressed by that. There has been also some fighting games where we could see some traces in the snow. So the demo you saw, it was actually a lot better executed?
I don't know, I felt it was more integrated with the gameplay. In a sort of more natural way. And so I can just assume that technologies like Nanite helps developer to have faster iterations, because I would assume that without that technology to have the same effect on the snow would need to have very solid direction and spend quite a lot of time working on it. But then you can't really iterate it too easily. And so I assume that using technology like Nanite made that process much faster and more iterative. It's just my take.
That's a very interesting thing because, due to new technologies and tools and pipelines, the way of making games changes, right? And so one question I have for you guys is that are you actually seeing, transformation of roles or transformation of processes in the games you tend to be working on right now? Who has something to mention about this?
I guess I can go first.
Jeff?
So definitely I'm seeing an evolution of roles and responsibilities. In some ways, it blurs. A lot of people are touching a lot of things and bringing their expertise to come together with a better collective solution. Even in our smaller company, we're only about 44 developers. It's pretty incredible to see how quick we can iterate because of where the engine and the tools are at, and we can quickly try an idea and then go, nope, we don't like that, let's try this. And some of us even try a couple things at one time and we compare and kind of combine. So yes, I think just the general consensus I'm seeing is that people with a technical mindset, very comfortable with scripting and shaders and understanding pipelines, they're becoming even more and more valuable on the teams.
So does that mean that people that have a versatile understanding or like a transversal understanding of the various aspects, including art, technical aspects, etc., are becoming more and more praised by your team, or are you guys seeing this kind of trend? Cécile, how is it in Don't Nod? Do you see this kind of multiple skills, technical and art, becoming more prevalent?
That's a good question. I will talk about my steps in setup and rigging. There's a huge change because before rigging was a few amount of people in our studio that were able to rig. And usually there were even animators that can rig in a mixed, kind of a mixed skill. But right now, rigging is a few different skills inside one job. And so we developed a real setup team at Don't Nod because, I think there's much more changes in our way of creating, for example, characters in setup, but also I heard there's a much more, how to say that, much more people working for technical arts that are much more, how to sorry. Technical artists are important now for all games industry, I guess. There's much more students that want to be technical artists. I think also with new tools that needs programming and artistical views and engine integration, like procedural geometry inside Houdini. It was a huge step forward for lots of games, I guess. So you have to combine a lot of skills to use this kind of softwares.
And I think Konstantine was also touching base on this. You kind of talked about the usage of programming to kind of be able to conduct the work.
It's more like the more time goes on, everyone seems to tend toward the old Steam model, where pretty much everyone had to be a T-shaped individual, what Cécile pretty much described, where everyone needs to know and be able to perform a little bit of everything across different disciplines, especially for writers. And as most writers inevitably become narrative designers these days, you have to not just be able to do your job with the writing, you have to understand the application and the implementation and how it's going to work in the game. But I can go on about that for a very long time.
The thing that makes me worried, actually, Guillaume, about this is that sometimes we see in Japan teams that are structured in a very siloed way, right? Where you have, artists on one side, programmer on the other side, etc. And with kind of a limited interaction as much as possible to potentially, get the advantage of parallelizing things, etc. But like, how do you feel with regard, based on these trends that we can see in the West, how do you feel about how this could be integrated actually in Japan?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a complicated one. I think that Cécile mentioned technical artist. Technical artist is, I think, one of the positions that is the least existent in Japanese companies, especially because it requires artistic skill and programming technical skills. And in Japan, there is still this sort of divide between artistical careers and engineers. And so very few people are on the crossroads of both. And so that's one issue we find. So, and also because there's still a lack of formal educational training, which is something I talked about last year. People learn on the job. But learning tech art on the job is extremely challenging. And you need to be surrounded by the right people. You need to have access to information. You need to be working on a project that allows you to learn that, which is not always the case. And so I think currently in Japan, they just lack these people. And so you mentioned also Houdini. Houdini is really in demand right now. Houdini technical artist is probably one of the positions the most in demand in Japan. And there are very few people who have that experience.
Yeah. And you're mentioning education, and it's true that education, with regards to kind of the skills that are important in video games in Japan, are kind of siloed as well. Cécile, you're coming from like a school in France that is training people for multimedia. Is it including video games, or is it more just for?
Not exactly. My studies was about 3D animation, but my school has also a section for video games. Usually, when I did this school, usually we were kind of separate, but the school now tries to give much more the lessons, just to have a sort of several skills. Like, for example, now in animation section, we learn Unreal Engine for animation industry, so it's kind of mixing up everything. And same thing for video games. Now they are much more. They try to learn a lot more like software like Houdini, because before Houdini was just made for visual effects industry, so it's quite kind of new that we use it in video games. So we have to update every time to the new technology and the all things mixing up. And so,
but I think it's great that in France there is this kind of education that is, introducing new methodologies, etc., so that the students, when they come into a company, they can also introduce these new methodologies. Because, in Japan you have the training within the company, but you tend to learn about previous way of doing things, right? So it's kind of hard to introduce change that way. And I was wondering, Olivier, with you're focusing a lot on machine learning and you're seeing machine learning application in various domains. I was wondering, like, what's your take on the evolution of pipelines, roles, etc., and how much potentially machine learning is creating movement in that space.
Well, I see a lot of application of machine learning, successful one, where we are starting to see some changes in the pipeline. And sometimes those initiatives are not just necessarily on machine learning, but it's on the exploitation of having access to large amount of data, which we do have at Ubisoft. Recently, we shared some work we've done with the modeling of faces. We're facing some challenge, like if you, at Ubisoft, like we're doing massive open world games, very narrative driven. You have a lot of heads to create, a lot of faces. This initiative is called Face Shifter. And what it does is that it allows you to create a lot of different variety of heads in a very, very fast manner. So it's going to have two impacts, I would say, and it's currently in progress. The first one is that it will complement the capacity of tech artists and artists to actually model those heads. And it's quite challenging because you need to have the model, you need to create the textures, you need to make sure that you can animate them and fit the budget as well. So it's quite something. So that's the first aspect that's going to change. And I think also on the long run, for players, it will make them getting more diversity with those capacity. So it's changing the way the pipeline are, because tech artists will probably be assisted by such kind of systems, and it will allow also for more iteration at a lesser cost also. So this is an interesting avenue, and mainly what I'm seeing right now is how those techniques based on machine learning, based on learning also from the data, is actually assisting the creativity of artists. And I think this is very critical. More so if you have a very large world to create, a lot of diversity to feel. This is where those techniques are currently quite shining.
And what's your take on the what's your take, guys, on the areas where development efficiency would need to be improved the most? Like, what are you kind of seeing, regularly, and you're like, why is this problem not solved yet? And we're really talking about, development efficiency, pipeline workflow. Is there anyone that wants to complain about something? Yes?
I'm sure we all do. Yeah. Just raised my hand against earlier. It's the fact that remote working is not seriously being accounted for. That is everywhere, that is globally. In Shapefarm, a large number of the developers that we're working together are from all over the world. I'm in Greece, we have people who are working in the Netherlands, we have people working in Japan, and we are managing for the time being, but overall it's very difficult to find ways to bridge communication. Some of us can, sacrifice ourselves and work in Japanese time. I'm doing it because I have 2 kids and I have no sleep. But I would rather that this is not accounted for most of the staff members. And I think it would open up possibilities for working with people across the world.
Cécile,
Yeah.
I saw you smile.
Yeah, I have a few complaints. No, in fact, I will say for setup is a rigging, setup, etc. It's a very complicated work because usually the philosophy and technology we use for putting bones and skinning on characters is like the same science Toy Story 1. I'm not joking, it's the same philosophy. So usually when you are used to this technology, it's quite easy to understand and to make your characters. But for example, just painting weights on characters. It's so boring. We should improve automatization of skinning or joint placement or even AK calculation. So that's why I was talking about Houdini, because it's an interesting starting point, because before they used to have widget style rigging system, so it was basically same thing as Maya, 3ds Max, etc. It was real skeletons, real widget skeletons inside a character, and the software is entirely procedural, but the rigging system was not. It was so strange, and so now they try. It's a beginning. It's not bad, really. It's something with a plugin called Kinefix, and they try to procedurally obtain something good for rigging systems. And I think setup, as I said, can be really boring.
But Olivier, painting weights and things like that, isn't that a solved problem with machine learning? There are still challenges, do you think, in this area?
Thank you for the question. So there are many works on the academic side that you can actually look online. There are some progress, but the thing is, for certain application, the rigging, for instance, or the skinning weights, for instance, it has a huge impact on what you will see afterwards once you start playing the game. So it's very, how to say that, there is a lot of creativity into how the subtleties of the movement of the skin, okay, let me take a step back. Let's say you want to animate an animal, like a dog. There are like many subtleties in how it's going to move, and what you are going to perceive is not the raw animation. You're going to see like a volume moving around, and there is a lot of inputs that the artist needs to be to add to make it relatable for the game you're making. So I would say that at this point, like, this kind of topic for machine learning needs to be really framed as not as a replacement, but maybe as an accelerator, so that you can have like a proposition to start with.
Yeah, exactly.
Just avoiding the, maybe, as you said, like the 80% that are boring.
Yeah, exactly.
And then from here you can iterate and really leverage the creativity of your artist. And I think in that context, it will be solved like that.
Jeff, you had something to...
Yeah, just something I wanted to add. I feel like the tools have improved in a lot of aspects in terms of how quick we can prototype, and we can do very broad brushstrokes, very fast. The problem I'm always hitting is the last 10%.
Exactly.
It's still just as hard as it was 20 years ago.
Yep.
And I don't have a solution. I don't have an idea to this. But it's that 10% that takes just as long as the 90% still today. And I'm hoping we find ways to make that happen, because I think that's going to be something that's going to alleviate a lot of the pressure in all of our productions, whether you're doing indie or quadruple A. This would be a big thing. And then the last little plug, in case anybody is out there who works at Epic, please, please, please optimize compiling shaders. Thank you.
Oh yes, I can see the compiling shader thing.
Yeah.
Very often on screens around me.
I can't match them budget for probably how many cores they have in their machines. So yes, any optimizations to compiling shaders.
Guillaume, you wanted to say
greatly
something?
appreciated.
There are three things, I think, and it's more on the dev, really programming side of things. That I think, because of the scale of the projects, and it's increasing every year, I think we need more DevOps, more automation, continuous integration. Something I've seen very often is we spend an insane amount of time and energy on things that should have been automated. And I think we tend to automate the process, the build process, for example, way too late in the development. And that's one problem I see. The second problem is technical debt management. It feels like nobody really look into that. But decisions, and sometimes hasty decisions, over time they pile up and they make things more complex. And now, because we are in an industry of game as a service, the releases of the game is not, you're not releasing a product, you're releasing something that's going to evolve. And so if you don't manage your technical debt properly, releasing your game is going to be hell. Adding feature is going to be a slow process, and you're going to miss on opportunities. And the third point is very contentious, but I think that we're getting worse at writing software every year. I feel that there are less and less good software programmers, because it seems to be less important because of the tools, because of the technology. But if you look at the last 10 years, all the progress we had was because of hardware, not software. Machine learning, it's hardware. You know, these technologies, they've been invented 30 years ago. Micropolygons, we talked about that once. It was a white paper 20 years ago, but the hardware couldn't deal with it. Same thing with ray tracing. We are working on some cool terrain technology based on white papers that were written 20 years ago. So what I'm saying is that the sort of pace of innovation when it comes to software is really decreasing. We're just leaning too much on hardware. And when we put everything together with technical debt management, to me it feels that eventually we're going to hit a wall where more progress is just going to be way too costly.
By the way, there was a very interesting talk this morning from Pete Kugler from Bungie about all these problems of integration and branches, etc., and how they deal with this at Bungie. If you're interested in that topic, you should probably watch that talk from CEDEC this year. It's really brilliant. So the problem with this innovation in software, do you have the impression it's because more programmers are spending their time on writing tools or manipulating blueprints or high-level languages, and so because of that, like shader compiling gets slower and and less innovation in the runtime?
I think it's because to some extent there was this discussion earlier about people need to be versatile and need a cross-domain, but at the same time they also need to be more experts in all the different things. And so for someone to be extremely good at AI, they need to dedicate 90% of their career. If you want to be very good with procedural generation with Houdini, you need to spend many, many years. And so because of that, I think that software, for example, learning how to write proper software, learning to write a compiler, learning to write a game engine, people won't have the time to just learn that. They need to learn their technology. They need to bring value to the production. I think that's the main cause.
And definitely there could be a slowdown in that domain because of that. So, Konstantine, you are talking about, I'd like to come back to NLP a little bit, because I feel this is a domain where there's a lot of innovation being done, and it can potentially transform, it has the potential to transform, how, the work that has to be done to put up cinematic scenes together, and, from writing to having actually the characters in game speaking. Maybe all this pipeline is going to change. So I'd like to get, Olivier and Konstantine feelings on it. Maybe we can start with Olivier on NLP. I'm feeling there's a huge potential in that technology.
Yeah, but not just NLP actually. It's when you have a mix of technologies using NLP and mixing other models, for instance, into it. For instance, I'm going to maybe take a little tangent here. Was looking at tools that are being synthesizing art, like for instance Midjourney or DALI kind of DALI approach. It's very powerful because the idea here is to actually take some form of text, some form of as an input, and try to understand the meaning of it, the intent of it, and turn it into a series of assets that can be used inside games. So it's not just only about dialogues creation or story creation, but it's starting to get way beyond and from text informing and creating and synthesizing various kinds of assets by mixing different models all together. So this is indeed happening quite actively. And I think if from the video game industry point of view, one cool example of that, it's really the I would say, yeah, the AI Dungeon, for instance, game. I don't know if you played it. It's really creating stories, and sometimes very weird stories.
Yes.
But it's getting for the old timer, the Zork game to the next level, I would say. What do you think, Konstantine?
I mean, in my case, I think that what is happening with the introduction of tools like natural language processing and machine learning, like I said, yarn spinner, which compared to what you talked about is much more primitive, is the idea of understanding how to do the broad strokes of implementing a game story faster.
Yes, definitely.
The problem that existed in the divide between what a writer does in a game is that up until even before I started, I thought the game writer was the nice man who put the words inside the boxes in the game. That was it. What I realized when I started, it was kind of like this because I worked with smaller teams who literally just gave me guidelines and said, go hog, we'll deal with it whenever it happens. But as I was working on it, I realized that in order to write for a game, you need to understand elements like the UI, you need to understand the UX, you need to understand some things about level design. You need to understand things about direction and the gameplay, how easy or how hard it is to introduce new characters. This is supposed to be the definition of the job of a narrative designer, and it is the reason why the job of the writer in games seems to be going away. That's the hot take version of it. In truth, what is happening is that all writers in games end up being narrative designers, and all the tools that can help them do their job faster and iterate faster and do the 90%, that's the easy part, like Jeff mentioned, they're just making this process much faster. There are things kind of like worrisome on my side of the job, which is, for example, how NLP is theoretically supposed to automatically generate things like quests and branching dialogue based on player input. But I don't know how much of this is applicable and how much of this will require kind of handcrafting.
Olivier?
I just would like to add a little nuance here. It's about assisting the content creators mostly. Those systems, maybe in the future, they will become so powerful that they will be able to provide a nicely tailored experience for the player. But at the end of the day, and I would say today, those tools really can provide and do maybe the 80% of the work, but the last 20% to actually get there, to make a strong player experience, will require a writer to actually go over the stuff, or a narrative designer to make sure that all the pieces actually fit together. But you can have like a multiplier in the quantity of things you could be doing and delivering afterwards.
Yeah, actually, the biggest hang-up in developing the story for a game is the iteration, reiteration. Of course, this happens in every part of video game development, but because the writer's job mostly starts at the very beginning, even before the design phase sometimes. And then there is this huge gap where nothing happens, like as far as the writer goes. The writer needs to go into the last 10% and fix it. At least that's been my experience. So you do the world building and everything, and then at some point, after the huge gap, people come back and say, listen, we threw away 95% of what you did. So here's the 5% we need you to make it really
Definitely.
work.
Definitely.
I was wondering if with multi-platform development, some of you guys are facing challenges, or is multi-platform development becoming something like a solved problem?
I
Jeff?
would say, so we've announced our first game is shipping on PC, PS5, and Xbox S and X in UE5. For sure, it's a lot easier to get builds up and running on our dev kits. So hats off to the companies and the engineers and the people behind that. I think the thing that still remains true, though, even if you're shipping on multiple platforms, I still think you need to pick your lead SKU. Like, are you a PC game first, then a console game, or are you a console game that you can play on a PC? This is still very important, even if you're supporting keyboard, mouse, and controller. And then probably the other thing is, at least for us, just because of how powerful the tools are nowadays, we had our console builds working even in our conception. So we're already getting into the habit of when we're having a playable build every day or something that we're going to push each week, we're making sure we're pushing it to the consoles as well as to PC.
So Guillaume seems to feel you have best practices here.
Yeah, I upload.
Good. Happy you approve.
So what are the challenges with multi-platform right now? Are there some left? Are they related to keyboard, mouse, and controllers only, or UI? Guillaume?
I think right now what's left are the platforms themselves, and the lack of standard, the lack of agreement about how things should work. I don't know if you have ever tried to do a cross-play game that has a very strong online component that has to work on both Xbox and PlayStation. It's not fun. And there's still a lot of things in progress, meaning that platforms are still evolving. And so, we use Unreal as well. Unreal gives you the cross-platform capability in terms of the build aspect, right? And so, for example, if you were to make your own engine and you need to have a network component, you're going to need to make your network component for Xbox and for PlayStation, and they are going to be different. If you use Unreal, you have both out of the box. But APIs can be different. The way you're supposed to store data is not the same. Security concerns are different. The way you need to display the names and things like that also different, and so that takes still quite some time to be cross-platform.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. I was thinking again about what you mentioned about this, pluridisciplinary, multidisciplinary people. I can remember talks from GDC and Chris Ecker, notably talking about this kind of things. Like knowing AI, animation, and physics. You can do a lot of things by yourself. But again, we mentioned that it's difficult to get people that have these multiple skills. Now, if someone kind of knows, has a wide range of knowledge, transversally speaking, then one person by himself or herself can take a decision, right? I know everything. I have all the information. I can make a decision. But I guess that that's still not a reality. And I was wondering, how do you have tips and tricks for our audience in terms of, how you organize things to make decisions? Because making a decision sometimes is not easy. There are a lot of trade-offs you have to consider. There are a lot of people you have to pull around the table. Do you have tips and tricks related to making decisions, Jeff?
Yes, this is a reality every day I live in. I think it starts with the why. I think this is very important for your teams, regardless of your size and how you structure your team. People need to understand the why behind what you're trying to do. And this starts with a vision, it starts with your pillars, because every decision you're making, especially, of course, people are going to have a difference of opinion at times. But you go back and you look at your pillars and what makes sense for the pillars, because you need to be consistent. Otherwise, you're most likely going to have more of a watered-down version of your game that you started with, and nobody wants that. So you don't want to lose that purity. So it starts with that. I think the other thing is, for sure, we probably can talk quite a bit about structuring teams and differences. But for simplicity's sake, you have your directors, and there needs to be somebody who's kind of the key product owner. It could be in some companies it's the creative director, it could be the producer, it kind of depends. I think this is key. You need to have this person just for when priorities are at conflict, and that this is going to be the anchor to make that final call. But ideally, it never has to escalate that high. Like, the team can facilitate this so you can move quickly and make decision and choice. So yeah, again, go back to the why, and then if things escalate, making sure there's a person there. So at least that's the common anchor on the team. So when you're delivering something, it's holding to that vision and it's consistent.
Cécile, do you have something to say about this?
Maybe. I think making decision can be hard, just as you say, to explain why. Like, okay, I know my job, but I have to convince someone who maybe doesn't know all the technical stuff or all the time-consuming things they ask us. So I think we have to be really patient and maybe like a teacher, like, you have maybe to teach your work in very simple ways, but in another hand, very accurate way, to not be like, yeah, you said something, but I understand why, but why did you not choose something else? And you are okay. I will repeat myself. It's not that way. It's not working that way, etc., etc. So, yeah. So you have to be patient and open to teach people. But in the same time, I guess we should also have how to say that. We should not take things too personally and don't put too much ego on our decision. Like, it's okay if it's not your final decision. It's okay if someone has a better idea. Just don't push. Like, okay, but I want it. I want it's my game. It's my step. It's my work. Maybe usually just have a step forward and just be like, okay, maybe it's my ego that is talking right now, and maybe it's a good it was a good decision. So, yeah.
Yes,
But
Olivier?
maybe also, just to continue a bit on this discussion, I think also it's important to have some form of definition of why. What are the criteria you're looking for the why? I think it's important. Because then people can prepare to take the decision, and they can actually motivate it if you provide beforehand a sort of a framework of thinking to define what you're looking for the why, the inside of the why. I think that is important. And also something you mentioned about T-shapes and breaking silos. It's something that is interesting if you mix people and you start looking for the state of the art before choosing to implement a specific technique, making sure that you get a good sense about what's happening outside, because it will help a lot to take the proper decision ultimately.
So Cécile was talking about having more of a kind of a teacher or moderator, not having ego, etc. And I was thinking, what do you think about the teams that argue that without management it's better for making video games? Like, do you have this kind of discussions with your peers or in your studios, whether like management is a hindrance or is actually helping? Konstantine?
Well, actually, in our case, in Shapefarm, what we've been trying to do is gradually move away from a top-down model. Not having managers, I wouldn't say that, but establishing a consensus early on that the leads understand that they can follow along their teams, so each team can work independently, so each lead can pull the plug, and, you know what works, what doesn't work, what goes against the game, so conflicts are kept at a minimum. And that falls under a bit, as Cécile has explained, where having a general understanding of how different disciplines work streamlines the process of solving problems in the game. So a producer that understands some things about technical processes and gameplay and design can more easily help and address and negotiate the problems instead of having to go back and forth and waste precious time clarifying what the problem is. But generally, no matter how big the team gets, the smaller is easier.
Okay. So I've been looking non-stop, whether there were questions or not. We don't have any questions yet. So don't forget that if you want to hear, some of our panelists commenting on your question and giving you insights or takeaways, don't forget to enter questions. Now, don't worry, I would have questions for more than 10 hours of panels. So we're not running into any problem. Now I'm going to ask you all guys, one by one, if you had to recommend a game development related website to regularly go to, which one would it be? Olivier.
It's a bit of...
Is there a
There's so
place
many.
you regularly go to?
So for me, I follow up regularly what's happening state-of-the-art wise for machine learning, for instance, how it's being applied. I'm thinking about Unity as an example. They are doing quite a lot of activities there to follow up. So their website is very rich. I will do a shameless plug, GDC Vault in particular. It contains many interesting talks, and people are starting to deliver more and more talks about how machine learning is changing little by little how we're making games. So that would be the two sites I would recommend people.
And the person in charge of that summit is really good. Mr. Olivier. Konstantine, is there any game development related website that you regularly go to?
It's two, actually. One is Pixel Prospector. I like to go in because it has this huge archive of postmortems for games. So it's a good idea to get an idea on the hindsight. And I spoke about this in my talk, but it's a good idea to kind of give postmortems more exposure and know what went wrong and fix it as we go along. That's one. And the other one I go to for fun is noclip.website. I don't know if you've heard of it. It is this museum of different game levels. When you go in, it has everything from levels from Mario Sunshine to like Dark Souls. You can do the flyovers. They're pretty, it's very good.
Oh.
Yeah, it's very cool.
I didn't know that. Cécile.
I have few also because when I'm working, I just spend my time on Houdini and Maya forums and Stack Overflow, but I think it's usually everyone is going to this website. So I will maybe recommend a very interesting tool for rigging called MGear, because it has an amazing forum and even with topics in Japanese. Where they discussion about the tool. So it's a Python developed tool for Maya. And there's also a lot of talks about how to develop in Maya with Python, because it's a lot of artists or even not persons, usually the person who are using this tool are not developers, so it's more friendly to start, I would say. And there's lots of discussion about how to do rigging, what is wrong with a character, what kind of philosophy can you use for setting something, or do you use procedural things or physics, etc. It's amazing. And I just finished with one last thing, is the the website Reddit, there is a huge community for Blender and Houdini, which you can see project and different questions, and they are very reactive. And for example, I love Blender one because there is now something called geometry nodes, which is like Houdini, so procedural modeling and generation, etc. And there is a lot of very creative persons who are making new things with this technology, and so it's very inspiring.
Thank you very much, Cécile. Jeff?
So, outside of normal industry news, which comes into my feed, I honestly don't visit a lot of game dev sites. I try to go more towards the authors directly. So maybe they have a Twitter account and they post stuff periodically. As Olivier and a few others mentioned, convention talks are a big thing. I love conventions, especially postmortems. I love hearing more about people's failures than successes, because that's where I feel like I can learn so much from. So this is great. So I always appreciate when people have stuff to share and they're willing to be so transparent. And then really maybe just calling people that I know are experts in different fields, and I try to do this regularly with different people, just to hear their challenges and compare different ways we would tackle things. So yeah, I mean, this for me, Discord, Twitter, LinkedIn, different communities, I normally follow directly.
Excellent. I think Jonathan would recommend Discord as well. Guillaume?
It's funny because I was going to say Reddit as a joke, but now it's true that there's a lot of there's a lot of things on Reddit, so it needs to be curated. But it's actually interesting because I asked that internally to see what people use, because and Twitter was the number one thing that people say, because now it's so hard to find properly curated news information, especially in news outlets, that people tend to follow other developers and see what's happening. But other than that, the websites that our devs use the most are one, UDN, of course, and the other one is O'Reilly.com. So we offer no subscriptions, O'Reilly. So you have our developers; they have access to every single book released by O'Reilly, and that's kind of how they make their learning curriculums.
Thank you very much. We actually, after I made this announcement, we suddenly got 5 questions. So we'll probably have time to pick maybe 2 of them. We'll try not to spend too much time on the answers so that we can hopefully cover most of them. There was one question, and that's probably more for Jeff. It's like, how do you find notice hard work in your other team's work process? Like, people are either working too hard or places where, crunch will happen.
Oh, I love this question. Thank you. A lot of the people at Yellow Brick, we come from a AAA background. And building those types of games takes a lot of talent, effort, time, and energy. And they're amazing to work on. But we knew going into a smaller company atmosphere, we wanted to be very, very cautious about crunch. We don't crunch. We budget our schedules based on a normal 40-hour work week. In fact, actually it's not 40 hours, it's like 32 hours, because I assume one day is lost each week to meetings and planning. But we have a pretty good process in terms of talking about what's to do next. What's the plan? We don't over-plan, though, so we don't plan too far ahead, because we know we're going to be more intelligent the following week and have more answers from the previous week of work. And so we're constantly having that discussion all the time.
And how do you evaluate? How do you evaluate that some workload might end up being too much? People are skilled enough to estimate things fairly properly? Yeah, for sure. So it's I call it a culture of commitment. So the people who are going to be the ones to do the work should be the ones costing it first. Yeah. Even if they're bad at predicting their work, they'll get better over time. It's a good learning process for them. But at a certain point, the glass can only fit so much water.
So the choice needs to be made. And this is what we do. And the answer is not to, well, let's go get a bigger glass. That's not the reality I'm in anymore. So we have to give up on something else. And this is what we're always doing. Because, you know, we called ourselves Yellow Brick Games, not Yellow Brick Game. Like, we're going to make multiple games. That's the plan. So we're going to build what we believe is the best thing we can do, but from that, we'll build up something even better after that.
So there was someone asking about the the names we've been giving of the website, but I would recommend to that person to watch the video afterwards to kind of get the names. So that we have one last very question that I will take. It's about AI, and that will be for Olivier. Could you predict how AI asset production will be used in the future? Recently, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, etc. are known, and I myself, I am amazed at their evolution. I'm interested in how Western developers view these evolutions.
Well, I think there will be an overlap with the next.
Maybe a quick answer, because I think we are almost over time.
So I think it's getting matured, actually, and in a very focused manner and a very practical manner. Just go back at the last GDC, you will see many examples of application, and that it's starting to drip from the Western point of view into various AI summit, for instance, at GDC, or rendering summit. So you start to see very practical things that can actually help, and not like necessarily those grandiose prediction about how AI is going to do everything by itself.
Thank you very much, Olivier. And if you want to hear more about AI, join the next panel on technology. Thank you very much, everyone.